Thanks everyone, and thanks for that kind introduction, and thanks for coming to the late afternoon session. I know this is a tough one. Duketon Mining's a nickel sulphide focused explorer and developer ultimately. We've got two resources that we build that name off, Rosie and C2, and I'll take you through those and we'll talk those in detail. That picture just up front, that's just drilling, diamond drilling out amongst at Rosie late last year. We're currently out there drilling at the moment as well. Cautionary statement, I'd encourage you to go and read that at your leisure. It's a very simple structure to Duketon. We've got about 122 million shares on issue, just over 11 million options, and they all sit in management or directors' hands. Market capitalisation about 38 to $40 million, depending on the share price of the day. The interesting part about our story is that we've always maintained a large cash balance in the company, currently at just over $18 million, which is a combination of $14 million of cash and $4 million of investments. And then share price performance, we range, as you can see on the graph there, from mid 50 cents per share down to sort of high 20s, and we're currently sitting around the low 30s at the moment, and give us an enterprise value of around $19 to $20 million. Our shareholder base, we can kind of get to 60% of our shareholders within probably 5 or 6 phone calls, and it's dominated by Hermanus Holdings, which is a guy called Kerry Hermanus, who's probably known to a number of us, but he's a nickel identity from some years ago. There's an institutional holder that holds about 10% of the stock, and then directors and management hold around 11% or thereabouts, and then there's a couple of big blocks held through a couple of different broking companies as well. The board's very simple. It's made up of 3 people, myself being one of those. Seamus is the chairman. He's a corporate lawyer by training, spent a lot of time in China and lived up there for almost 20 years. And dealing with Chinese resource-related legal issues. Heath is a known person in the industry. He was one of the early people with IGO, put together Dore with Alan Kelly, and has also more recently been instrumental in putting Capricorn Metals together as well. So he's got a great heritage as well, and a geologist by training. Look, the investments around Duketon, it's a pretty simple equation at the end of the day. We think there's high demand for nickel. We think that nickel market, if you cut it down into constituent pieces, that the class 1 nickel, which is sulphide derived nickel, is going to demand a premium and be sought after into the future. We think we've got a project with significant upside. We've got 2 resources. Both of those are open at depth and along strike, and it's just a matter of drilling, and I'll show you a graph that shows you that direct relationship between drilling and expenditure on nickel sulphides in the belt and resource growth. We're working through a number of development options. We've previously tabled a scoping study which considered Rosie as a trucking and toll treating project, which worked. And that was pinned around an $8 a pound nickel price. It goes up significantly, and it's highly leveraged to the nickel price, that project. I'll take you through that in a little bit of detail. And look, we just think it's an attractive valuation at this point in time. It's 100% owned. It's unencumbered from a resource perspective. There's a granted mining tenement that both those resources sit on, and we have no royalties and no offtake agreements, which we would argue is a very good thing at this point in our cycle of a company. And we'll take those on board as and when they present, and as and when's the correct time to consider those. Just a location perspective here. There's Laverton down to the south here. There's all BHP's mines and IGO sitting in the middle with Cosmos Group, which is the old Western Areas project as well. About 130 kilometres on the next major greenstone belt, which is travelling through here, just north of Laverton, which is where our tenement position is. Our tenements are in black through here, here and here. Off to the north of that is recently transacted the ex-Cannon ground, which is a nickel sulphide play, very similar to ours, had approximately 130,000 nickel tonnes in resource, and was picked up by a private equity group out of Canada called Kintera for approximately $45 million. So they're currently exploring that and getting on with that, and continuing to work through those projects, and essentially our tenements follow the greenstone belt, butt up against the old Cannon Resources tenements as well. I will talk to you a little bit about this Tate project up to the north, so just remember this diagram. The majority of our resources are sitting down here at Rosie and C2 and sitting on a granted mining tenement that we have there. Combination of tenements there. There's some nickel rights tenements and 100% owned tenements as well in there. Look, adding all that up, just north of 100,000 nickel tonnes in resources. Majority of that's actually in indicated resources. Just over 14,000 tonnes of copper, and probably uniquely and interestingly, there's just a bit over 250,000 ounces of PGEs, predominantly within Rosie, and we think that's a significant part of the value proposition, and part of the metallurgical work that we're doing is just showing us that we're recovering those into the concentrate, and we think that's actually sitting in a sensible and saleable product as a combined concentrate. As I said before, we've got a positive scoping study out on Rosie. We're having a look at a couple of other options, including having a concentrator on site and being able to mine both C2 and Rosie and process it through that concentrator. The way we've structured the tenement package now, we've got very, very minimal holding costs, while still retaining this opportunity to secure tenure over any nickel rights, where we have a contractual arrangement with the tenement holder where we can actually exercise our right to have a mining tenement issued back to us on a JORC compliant resource. So we're paying very little for that, but got that privilege contractually in the background. Breaking those down, both those deposits are about 50,000 nickel tonnes each. They're within 2 kilometres of each other. We think there's lots of exploration potential in between all of that, and I'll take you through another slide that shows you that. Two different beasts at the end of the day. Rosie is really a high grade, narrow, traditional komatiite deposit, albeit with a lot of PGEs within the current resource. C2 is a big, broad, open pittable, low grade. It's 0.6, 0.7% nickel. Almost comes to surface, has a fantastic geometry as far as open pit shapes go, and I'll show you a photo of that. And got some really interesting and positive metallurgy associated with it. Rosie, this scoping study, look, it's a very simple scoping study at the end of the day. It is mine a portal, push a decline down underground to the top of the fresh rock part of the resource, and within a couple of months you're producing ore from strike driving, and then a couple of months after that you're producing stoping dirt out of that. Makes it a very simple, commercially upfront program. This current scoping study's got $18 million as that pre-production capital. I'd expect that to be around $30 million in today's costs. It's a pretty simple operation. It's a decline, underground mine, strike driving and long hole stoping, and pull that product out and drive it around to a concentrator within the area. Annual production's about 6,000 nickel tonnes per annum out of that as a toll treating arrangement. This is just a 3D image I'll take you through. If it plays, it does. That's all the drilling in the area. That just shows you the Rosie and C2 and how far the drill holes are apart. That is the Rosie wireframe of the mineralisation. It'll show you the geometry of it. It's actually a substantial deposit. It's almost 1 kilometre long, the main part of the mineralisation. That's the stoping from the scoping study. The blue is the decline access and the ventilation. The orange there is EM plates, and I draw your attention to the one out to the left there. We've only just recently drilled into that and hit about 5.5 metres of sulphides in that, and we're waiting for assays to come back. We think that's a new position. C2, you can see it's a big, broad, plus 10 metre intercepts, around that 0.6, 0.7% nickel mark. Geometry-wise works really well as an open pit. And then I think this will zoom out to what it looks like with a little bit of infrastructure on there as things. And you can see the road from where those resources are out to the road. It's about 1 kilometre that we have to develop in the way of the road, otherwise you can drive in and out of the project on a fairly well-maintained, albeit dirt road. Looking at Rosie in long sections, to the left of that image is north, essentially, or approximately. It says west, but it's actually heading off to the northwest. And that's sorry, lost the... The rest of the presentation is really good. Like we've lost that feed, obviously. Sorry?
He's ducked under the table. He's either escaping or it's... Oh, two of them under the table.
There we go. I'll just go back one slide. Look, this is a long section of the resource, and you saw that 3D image that I put up, but essentially all those pink dots up there are what we call a nickel equivalent percent metres. So it's trying to give a proxy for a bit of economics, and everything in pink we think is broadly, as a rule of thumb, economic and mineable, and you can see the whole resource is dominated by that. The green outline is actually the indicated resource portion, and the blue dashed is the inferred resource. As you can see, that is the extent of drilling on that in that resource. You can see the possibilities as far as extensions go at down plunge and along strike as well. It's a very handy looking ore body, and if you look at those numbers, it's about 2.8 million tonnes at about 3.3% nickel equivalent. That ends up being, if you do those numbers, it's about 90,000 nickel equivalent tonnes in there. So depending on how you cut it, there's 250,000 ounces of PGEs, there's 50,000 tonnes of nickel metal, and 10 plus thousand copper tonnes in there. So it's a substantial ore body in its own right, and I think it's a very valuable one, and it's about extracting the value appropriately out of that. The drill core, this is just a couple of examples, and obviously good drill hits the drill hole on the right is a cracking intercept, one of the best that I've seen as far as all my experience in nickel goes. The one on the left is one of the more recent drill holes that we've put into the bottom of Rosie. It still holds together as an ore body even at depth, and that's essentially 3 metres at 3% nickel. If you calculate that out with 3.7 grams per tonne PGEs in there, that comes out at about 3 metres at 4.8% nickel equivalent. It's a substantial intercept, and that's pretty consistent, that 3 metres at 3 plus associated PGEs in every part of the ore body. That's the graph that I was talking about, where constant delivery on expenditure focused on nickel. And we have a history where we focused on some of the gold for a period of time. But when you put that all together, you can see that whenever we're focused on nickel, whenever we're drilling for nickel, we continue to expand and extend those resources that we've got and find more. Picture on the right there is just C2. You can see what it looks like in cross-section. It is a big, broad, plus 10 metre intercepts of that 0.6, 0.7, ranging out to plus 1% in places, and so there's some nice sweet spots in there. Dominated, it's a real sulphide-rich deposit, and the metallurgy shows that as well, and I'll show you a couple of slides on that. Top left concentrate slide is Rosie, and the bottom right one is C2. Both of them perform really well from a metallurgical perspective, and they're pyrrhotite and pyrite-rich ore bodies, so they pull a lot of iron through in that system as well, which is a really good thing for a lot of the concentrators and smelters around within Western Australia. We've got a couple of different options with Rosie. We can go down a nickel concentrate and get a high-grade nickel con, or we can go down a bulk con and pull a lot of the copper through in that system as well. So we've got a couple of options there. We did look at trying to recover the PGEs separately with Rosie through a gravity system front-ending that concentrate plant. We can pull out about 8 grams per tonne in a pretty rough concentrate, but that's essentially a saleable product, and we can also have conversations with plants about which routes we go and whether we try and pull out the PGEs before we process the rest of the ore as well. C2 produces a remarkably nice concentrate. It's got a very high iron content, and in fact the last couple of runs on that concentrate trials that we did was actually trying to reject a little bit of iron out of the system to pull the nickel grade up, and there are a couple of levers that, depending on where that concentrate might arrive to, we can pull up and down and everything else. So it actually performs really well, and it's very, very sort of flexible concentrate as far as we can see. That recovery, 77.3, that's in an open system, so we expect that will tighten up and probably perform up in the mid 80% recoveries once we do further testing on it as well. This is just an exploration slide of the what we call the ultramafic, the Duketon bulge essentially. It's the ultramafic complex. This is magnetic image in the background, and then this is a magnetic inversion in the middle. So this approximates the ultramafic throughout the bulge. The ridges that we see through here are what we think are close to surface repeated contacts that will give us extended exploration possibilities within all of that. Obviously C2 sitting up here at Rosie, that's about 2 kilometres apart. As we keep going through these slides, we can see anomalism sitting on these ridges. Back down through here, these are significant holes in their own right with no resources attached to them, very limited drilling around them. Just to give you a sense of scale as well, that's 4 to 5 kilometres across there and maybe 3 to 4 kilometres up and down that image. And that's comparable to some of the biggest ultramafic complexes within Western Australia and possibly globally as well. So we've got a large package of rocks to play with here. I think we've only scratched the surface as far as that exploration goes, and we're showing some very early signs that we've got more to be won and more to be found in that whole place. And an example of that is looking down along this ridge here. We've recently completed some geophysics and some surface EM, got a large plate sitting here, and it's actually sitting at depth beneath these historical intercepts. And that's where I showed you on that 3D image that we drilled that 5.5 metres of sulphides on a basal contact, which intersects part of that plate as well. And we think that's going to add further opportunities. And as we do more downhole EM, further drilling in this position, I think that'll continue to grow and be part of the story of the Duketon belt going forward. Tate, as I talked about, this is a separate exploration play up to the north. You can see the very end of the Duketon belt just through here. Our tenure continues up to there, and then that's where the ex-cannon ground commences up through there. This is a different model. It's large mafic intrusive type bodies, so we're looking more like a Craton margin, like a Musgraves or even a Nova Bollinger, are pretty fair analogies that you can put in here. There's very early stage exploration. These late intrusions that have come through have got one historical drill hole through it, which was an ex-BHP drill hole. Hit a little bit of nickel, hit a little bit of copper in that. That's probably telling us more that it's a mafic rock than anything else. Our geologist has been out on the ground, found the bottom of that hole, confirmed that that's a mafic rock. It's a great host rock for what we're looking for. Subsequent to that, we've got some EM over the top of that northernmost intrusion, which looks the best, and a couple of low-grade EM anomalies through there, and they're either going to be, I think, take us down the nickel sulphide route, or it'll take us down through possibly a gold route, and they're shear zones. We'll get to that exploration in the middle of this year or thereabouts after we do a little bit of clearances. But it's a kind of exciting project from its scale and from its uniqueness as far as the geology goes. 1 minute. This is my last slide anyway. We've got a bit of news coming up. We've got lots of activity in front of us. We're currently diamond drilling on the project. We're sporadically doing either downhole EM on each of that drilling and then a little bit of subsequent surface EM as well. We've got a mining study that we're trying to pull together at the moment, which is looking at an updating of that toll treating proposition, and then also looking at a combined mining study that's got considers a concentrator on site. We've got assays coming through, we've got surveys underway, then we'll come back and do some RC drilling at the bulge, try and follow up some of those other contacts that we're seeing, and then we've got some air core drilling and some more assays coming through, and that takes us through to the middle of the year, and then we'll continue on that front. That's all I've got. Thanks very much.